He showed up soaked from the rain, and all I had was one towel and a wine glass already half full. I hadn't expected anyone, especially not Holden. Not at that hour, not like that. He stood at the door with water dripping from his curls, shoulders slightly hunched, like the storm had followed him the whole drive from Atlanta. "Car trouble," he said, almost like a joke. "Blew a tire 10 minutes from here." I figured, maybe I could crash? I nodded before I even processed the words. It wasn't the first time he'd come by, but this time felt different. Maybe it was the hour. Maybe it was the silence that followed his voice. Maybe it was how long he held my eyes before stepping inside. He smelled like wet wool and cold air, familiar but changed. Older, taller, quieter. I handed him the towel. My fingers brushed his wrist. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I didn't realize how long we stood there until the towel in my hand started dripping from the rain still clinging to his jacket. He looked tired, like the world had been too loud lately and he'd come here just to quiet it. "Thanks," he said, his voice softer now. He reached for the towel, and our hands met for a breath too long. Not enough to call it anything, just enough to remember it. I asked if he was hungry, but I didn't wait for the answer. I was already pouring another glass. He followed me into the kitchen like he always used to, like he belonged there. We talked about nothing, his professors, his car, the storm. But the space between our words felt strange, charged. I found myself laughing, real laughter, the kind I didn't fake for company or pour into a wine glass to drown. And I hated how much I missed that sound coming out of me. At some point, I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and he leaned too, just across from me, eyes flickering with something I couldn't read. "I forgot how good this feels," he said. "What?" I asked, not trusting my voice. "This, here, talking to you. You don't pretend things are fine when they're not." I didn't answer. I didn't want to lie. I turned to rinse the glasses, thinking it would break the moment, thinking it would help. It didn't. I felt him step closer before I even looked up. "I missed this, Laurel," he said again, but softer this time. Like a secret. His presence was so near I could feel warmth coming off of him. I should have moved. Should have said goodnight. I should have remembered who I was supposed to be in this house. Instead, I turned around slowly, the stem of the wine glass still damp in my hand, and he was already looking at me like I was something he'd dreamed about touching, but never had permission to. We didn't kiss, we didn't even touch. But that moment, it stayed with me. Even after I climbed the stairs later that night, alone. Even after I slipped under the cold sheets and stared up at the ceiling, I could still feel the way he looked at me. Not like a son looks at a mother figure. Not even like a boy with a crush. It was something else entirely. Something dangerous. I told myself nothing happened. I reminded myself that I'd done nothing wrong. But even the walls knew that wasn't the whole truth. I'd felt it shift. That line I'd never imagined I'd flirt with. Holden had only stayed the night. The guest room, like always. He left early, said he had class Monday morning. But before he closed the door behind him, he paused, said thanks. Smiled again, just a little. And that smile, it broke something in me. Because it wasn't the relief I felt when the door clicked shut. It was a loss. I was the kind of woman people called put together, which was just code for, she doesn't make a mess of things in public. My days were predictable. Morning coffee, a long walk around the block, watering the same potted hydrangeas on the porch even though they never really bloomed. Dinner at 6, 2 glasses of wine by 8, bed by 10 if I could fall asleep before the silence got too loud. Vincent, my husband, was gone most weeks. Logistics director for a regional chain, always between store visits and conferences. I used to wait for his calls. Then I stopped noticing when they didn't come. We didn't argue, we just existed. Clean counters, folded laundry, no scent on the pillows. We used to talk about taking a road trip out west, or remodeling the kitchen, or planting fruit trees in the backyard. But all of that faded. What was left were the habits, shared space, shared schedules, but no real closeness, no touch, just two people who'd once needed each other, and maybe didn't anymore. Before Vincent, I had a daughter, Ava, 13, funny, too smart for her own good. She loved swimming and lo-fi music and lemon bars with powdered sugar so thick it stuck to her nose. One day, I blinked, and she was gone. A distracted driver. A 4-way stop that wasn't really a stop. I wasn't in the car. After the funeral, I stopped working. I couldn't bear to plan other people's joyful moments when mine had been stolen. I sold the business, took the website down, boxed up the candles and the linens and the seating charts, and never looked back. That's when I met Vincent, a grief support group. He'd lost his wife to cancer. I could still hear the way he introduced himself. Vincent, widower, father to Holden. He was calm, grounded, solid. We married 6 months later, not out of passion, out of survival. But grief doesn't vanish when you put a ring on it. It just changes shape. Quiet, cold. It hangs between people until one of them stops reaching through it. And eventually, I stopped. Holden wasn't mine. But in many ways, he was the only person in that house who ever really saw me. He never called me Mom. I never asked him to. That line stayed clear. But over the years, he started calling more often. Asking for advice, sending photos of architecture sketches, asking which design felt more human. I always knew what he meant. He'd come for holidays, sometimes long weekends, and every time it was like the house filled with breath again. He noticed things. I noticed it when I changed the kitchen curtains. I noticed when I forgot to eat lunch. Noticed when Vincent didn't. One Thanksgiving, after the table had been cleared and Vincent had passed out in the recliner, Holden and I stayed up doing a puzzle. He poured us each a small glass of whiskey and told me he felt more at home here than anywhere else. Our hands touched the same piece. It was barely a second. But I didn't forget it. And based on the way he glanced up at me, neither did he. We never crossed any lines, never even stood near them. But something lived in the pauses. The way his eyes would linger half a second too long. The way my chest would tighten when he laughed at one of my stories like it actually mattered. I used to think I was imagining it. Maybe I was just too lonely. Maybe I was projecting. Maybe I wanted to feel seen so badly I was making something out of nothing. But feelings don't always ask for permission. They just appear, quietly, like a draft in a sealed room. Vincent never noticed. Not when Holden stayed up late in the kitchen with me. Not when I started saving his favorite snacks in the pantry. Not when my smile only reached my eyes when Holden was the one making me laugh. There was no scandal, no secret texts, no hidden touches, just something slow and soft, building over time, like a song that starts too quietly to hear, until it's all you can think about. The storm rolled on outside. Every so often, lightning flashed behind the windows, bleaching the room in white for a split second before the thunder cracked. But inside, it was quiet, too quiet. Holden sat on the far side of the couch, not close enough to touch, but not far enough to ignore. I told him about the neighbor's dog digging into my flower beds. He laughed, leaning back, sipping his wine like it was some French varietal and not the $11 bottle I always kept on hand. I watched his mouth when he drank, not on purpose, it just happened. He asked me how I was really doing. The kind of question you can't lie your way through, not convincingly. "I'm fine," I said, "just quieter these days." He looked at me for a long time. I couldn't hold it. I looked down, pretending to adjust my blanket even though it hadn't moved. "Have you ever thought about going back to work?" he asked. "Event stuff? Design?" I almost laughed. "Not really. That part of me feels like someone I used to know." "Well, I liked her," he said softly. That was the first time I felt the line shift again. Not in what he said, but how he said it. Like he wasn't talking to a stepmother. Like he was remembering someone. He maybe missed more than he should have. It was nearing midnight when I stood to clear the glasses. "Leave it," he said. "I'll help." We carried the glasses into the kitchen together. I handed him a dish towel. Our fingers touched again, just briefly. But this time he didn't move his hand away right away. Neither did I. I wiped the counter. He leaned back against the fridge. "I don't know if I ever told you," he said, voice low, "but when Mom got sick, you were the only person who asked me how I was doing without making it about her." I paused, swallowed. I looked at him. "You were 17, I said. "Someone should have been there for you." He nodded. "You were." There it was again, that flicker, not just gratitude, something more. "I used to come home just for Dad," he said. "Now I think I will come for you." The room went very still. I opened the dishwasher just to make a sound, something, anything. "I should head up," I said. "Big day of vacuuming tomorrow." He laughed. "Yeah, okay." But as I passed him, he didn't step away. He just stood there, close. Warm, tall. "You ever wonder if we met at the wrong time?" he asked suddenly. I turned halfway, heart in my throat. "You shouldn't ask me that," I whispered. He didn't answer. He just watched me walk away. I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the house shift and settle. I kept waiting to hear his footsteps upstairs, but I didn't. At some point, I started wondering if he'd gone to bed at all. At 3:18 a.m., I went down for water. The living room light was still on. Holden was on the couch, curled up under the throw blanket, eyes open, phone resting on his chest. He looked at me and sat up slightly. "You couldn't sleep either?" he asked. I shook my head. "Didn't try hard enough, maybe." I poured a glass of water, drank half of it standing there, then leaned against the counter again, same spot from earlier. He stayed on the couch, blanket bunched around his waist, face tired but alert. He didn't say anything else. The silence stretched. He broke it. "Laurel, I'm not trying to make things complicated. You already did," I said, voice barely audible. He nodded, accepted it. "I'm not gonna act on anything. I respect you too much for that." That should have been the end of it. That should have been the moment that closed the door. But instead, I walked over. Sat at the edge of the couch. Neither of us moved. He just looked at me like I was someone he'd always known, and suddenly saw completely for the first time. And I let him. I woke to the sound of a bird outside the window and the faint ache in my back from the couch. Holden was still next to me, fully dressed, asleep, head against the cushion. We hadn't touched, but I remembered every word, every breath, every moment we almost did. I slipped away quietly, upstairs to brush my teeth, change, and recenter. By the time I came back down, he was gathering his bag. "Thanks for letting me crash," he said casually. But the way he looked at me wasn't casual at all. "Always," I said. And I meant it. I meant it more than I wanted to. He paused in the doorway. The rain had stopped. The sky was that pale gray blue that means the day's starting whether you're ready or not. He looked back once. "Laurel? Yeah? I meant what I said. About you being the reason I come back." I stood there in the doorway holding the frame, trying not to lean. "I know," I whispered. He left. The door closed, and I didn't move for a very long time. It was 4 weeks before I saw him again. Holden had texted, of course. Casual check-ins, memes, a photo of a latte shaped like a leaf, but nothing personal, nothing real. Then, without warning, he showed up, late Sunday afternoon. I had a basket of laundry on my hip, hair clipped back, old college sweatshirt on. He looked exactly the same, except something in his face had hardened. Like whatever war he'd been fighting with himself had left him worn down and reckless. "I was in the area," he said. "Wanted to drop something off." He held out a paper bag. Inside, a book I'd mentioned weeks ago, out of print. He must have hunted it down. I didn't ask him in. He didn't ask to come in. But he followed me anyway, shoes off, jacket on the hook, like he used to live here. The kitchen light buzzed faintly. The radio was playing something slow. He leaned against the counter while I folded dish towels just to keep my hands busy. "Have you been okay?" I asked. He shrugged. "I've been worse. You? Same." He nodded, like that was fair. And then, with no fanfare, no apology, he asked, "Did you mean it? That I shouldn't ask you again?" My breath caught. "I did." He stepped closer. "But you didn't want me to stop." I didn't answer. My eyes were locked on the space between us. The only sound was the hum of the fridge and the ache inside my chest. It happened by the stove. I'd set a kettle down too hard and it rattled, and I flinched at the sound. He reached forward instinctively, placing a hand over mine, steadying it. That was all it took. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The crease between his brows, the edge of stubble across his jaw, that mark on his cheek from when he fell off his bike at 11. Holden stepped in. I didn't step back. His hand moved up my arm, slow, deliberate, until it rested just below my shoulder. Not forceful, not demanding, just waiting. I closed my eyes, and I let him kiss me. Not soft, not innocent. It was careful at first, like he was still checking if I'd push him away, but I didn't. I leaned in, and then it deepened. I felt his breath, his hands. The weight of everything we weren't supposed to say crashed into everything we couldn't hold back. When we pulled apart, neither of us spoke. We just stood there, faces inches apart, the kettle still warm beside us, the room too bright for what we'd just done. I waited, for shame. It didn't come. Only a kind of grief for all the time we'd wasted pretending this wasn't real. We didn't go upstairs. He kissed me again in the hallway, near the picture of his mother and me at some dinner years ago. I caught a glimpse of it over his shoulder and felt the air catch in my throat. But I didn't stop. He held my face in his hands like I might break. Like if he let go too soon, the moment would disappear. But we didn't cross that line. He didn't ask to stay the night. I didn't invite him. Instead, we sat on the bottom step of the staircase, barefoot, his hand curled around mine. I leaned my head against his shoulder. "I've spent my whole life trying to make sure I don't ruin anything," I whispered. "I don't want you to ruin anything," he said. "I just want you to be allowed to want something." That wrecked me. I closed my eyes, trying to imagine waking up and feeling clean. Feeling brave. I couldn't. But I could feel this impossible quiet safety I hadn't known in years. I stood. He stood, too. I kissed his cheek. He kissed my hand. And then he left. Without pressure. Without promise. But I knew it wasn't the end. The next morning, I called out sick from work I didn't even have. I stayed home and stared at the wall and replayed every second of the night before. Every breath, every touch, every near confession. Holden didn't text that day. I didn't either. But the next weekend he was back. No excuses this time. No dropped-off book, just a knock, and when I opened the door he said, "I missed you." I let him in. We didn't play pretend this time. No dishes to dry. No radio humming in the background. Just two people who already knew what they were risking and walked toward it anyway. We kissed again in the kitchen. Again in the hallway. And when I backed into the living room, heart racing, he followed. There was no line anymore. Just a long thread of consequences we'd unravel later. He stopped. "I need you to tell me to leave, Laurel." I stepped forward. "I won't." He kissed me like I was oxygen, and I pulled him into the room where my husband used to sit. The place where grief had made a home now became something else entirely. We didn't speak for a long time after, but everything had changed, and neither of us could pretend otherwise. The next time he left, it was different. No parting kiss. No gentle goodbye. Just the weight of what we'd done sitting thick between us like dust no one dared breathe through. I stood by the window for a long time after his car pulled away. The quiet in the house didn't feel clean anymore. It felt charged, hollow in a way that made me ache. I didn't cry. I vacuumed the stairs, wiped the counters, stripped the bedsheets and washed them twice. But my hands trembled, and every surface I scrubbed seemed to echo back the same question. What am I doing? It wasn't a regret, not exactly. It was grief, guilt. Not for the act, but for the weight it would put on everything else. My son called that night from his dorm. He wanted to know if I'd mailed the charger he left. I told him I forgot. Then he said, "You sound weird." "I'm fine," I lied. He hesitated, then laughed. "You're probably just tired." I let him believe that. After we hung up, I stared at my reflection in the microwave door, trying to see what had changed. But the face looking back at me wasn't different. It was my sister who brought it up. We were having coffee outside a small cafe, one of those overpriced spots she loved where every latte had an art degree. "You look good," she said slowly. "Rested." I glanced away. "Thanks." She narrowed her eyes. "Too rested. Suspiciously well rested." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "What are you implying?" She sipped her coffee, watching me over the rim. "Nothing. Just, you've had that widow haze for a long time. It's gone." I didn't respond. She tapped the side of her cup. "Is it someone?" My throat went dry. "No." She blinked. "That was fast." "It's not someone." A beat passed. "You know," she said carefully, "you're allowed to move on." I almost laughed. Move on? That wasn't what this was. This wasn't clean or correct or the beginning of something I could explain to anyone, least of all the people who still pitied me. I stood abruptly. "I have to go," she called after me, but I didn't turn back. In the car, my hands were shaking again. Because it wasn't about being seen. It was about how much I wanted to keep it hidden. I saw his mother in the cereal aisle. She didn't see me at first. She was squinting at the nutritional labels, her glasses slipping down her nose, and for a moment I thought about turning and walking the other way. But I didn't. I approached, smiled, said hello. She blinked like I'd startled her. "Laurel, it's good to see you." Her voice was warm but hesitant. "I was just thinking about you," she added. "You know, I ran into Holden last week." My stomach twisted. "Oh?" I kept my voice even. She nodded. "He seems better." I faked a laugh. "That's good." There was a pause, like she was watching me too closely. Then she said, "He always lit up around you." The box in my hand almost slipped. "I should go," I murmured. "Frozen stuff in the cart." She reached out and touched my arm gently. "You deserve happiness, Laurel. Just be careful. It doesn't cost more than it gives." That nearly broke me, because she didn't know. Not exactly, but maybe she did. He came over again. No pretext, no explanation. This time it was raining. I didn't offer coffee, didn't pretend to make small talk. We just stood there in the living room, the rain ticking against the windows like it was trying to keep time on us. Holden stepped forward, brushing hair from my face. "I think about you all the time," he said. "I know. I want more than this," he added quietly. My breath hitched. "I know that too." He took my hands, and for the first time I saw it in him. Fear. Real fear. "What are we doing, Laurel?" I looked at the floor. "I don't know, but I don't want to stop." He nodded slowly, like that answer both wrecked and rescued him. We didn't make love that night. We held each other, we said nothing, but something had changed, because this wasn't about grief anymore. It was about choice. And choice, I was starting to realize, came with consequences that didn't let you hide forever. Weeks passed, not all at once, not cleanly, but in that uneven, creeping way time moves when you're half waiting for something to end and half terrified it will. Holden stopped coming by as often. It wasn't abrupt, it wasn't cruel. It was subtle. Thoughtful text messages became delayed replies. A visit became a missed call. He was swamped with work. He was trying to get ahead. He'd let me know. And I didn't chase. Not because I stopped caring, but because I understood what this had become. Something temporary. Maybe even necessary. But not sustainable. He was healing. Not from me, but maybe through me. And now that the pain had thinned enough for him to stand on his own, he was remembering the shape of the world outside my kitchen. The night I finally admitted it to myself, I sat at the edge of my bed, holding the towel he left behind. It still smelled faintly like him. I didn't cry. I folded it gently, tucked it into the back of the linen closet, and I didn't touch it again. I saw him again by accident. Downtown. A crosswalk, bright daylight, and the smell of hot pavement rising from the street. He was with a woman. She was laughing, her fingers around his wrist, her thumb tracing lazy circles on his pulse. She couldn't have been much older than him. She looked like springtime and second chances. He didn't see me. And I didn't wave. I just stood across the street with my iced coffee, my sunglasses, and my practiced calm. The light changed. They crossed, and I let them go. Later that night, I called my sister. Told her I was thinking about taking a trip, maybe Oregon or New Hampshire, somewhere with trees and silence and no cell reception. She said, "That sounds like something you would have never done before." I said, "Maybe I'm not who I was before." She paused. "Is this about someone?" "No," I answered, but this time I wasn't lying. It wasn't about someone anymore. It was about becoming someone else. I wrote him a letter one night, not to rekindle anything, just to finish it right. It was short, honest, careful. "You came into my life when I was fragile, not just grieving, but numb. And I think you reminded me that I was still alive, that I could feel again. But loving someone in a moment of weakness doesn't always mean they belong in your strength. You were never a mistake, Holden, but we were temporary, and that's okay. I'll always be grateful for the night you knocked on my door." I folded it twice, slipped it into an envelope, address it, never mailed it. Some things don't need to be delivered to be heard. I placed it in the back of my drawer, underneath tax forms and birth certificates. Somewhere official enough that it felt preserved, but hidden enough that I wouldn't revisit it by accident. Closure doesn't always arrive with final words. Sometimes it just lives quietly between folded pages. My son came home for Thanksgiving. He walked in like a storm, laughing, taller, wearing a thrifted jacket and a beanie he'd probably stolen from someone's dorm floor. "Wow," he said, looking around. "You painted." I had. Soft green walls, new curtains, a bookshelf I built myself. The wine glasses were still there, but they were clean now, unused. I made pie. We watched an old movie. We argued over politics, then laughed about it. Later, as he was heading upstairs, he paused. "Mom?" "Yeah?" He glanced back. "You seem lighter." I met his eyes. "I am." No explanation followed. He didn't need one. We just nodded at each other, like two people who'd survived their own storms and quietly decided not to name them out loud. When I went to bed that night, I pulled the curtains closed. The rain had started again, light, but steady, and I didn't ache anymore when it hit the windows. Some things break you open, others teach you how to build again.